will do this presentation both in English and Arabic. So as I said, I will talk about one of the core risk assessment activities where data plays has a very important place. It's about dietary exposure assessment. So the objective is to provide you a comprehensive overview of this topic and its significance in risk assessment and regulation. So I will highlight why is it important today to have this tool and to apply this tool in our risk assessment, and also focus on its role in protecting public health and supporting risk assessment. And also I will explore with you how dietary exposure assessment can be applied to improve regulatory systems, including its practical benefits for food safety management. And also I will give you just an idea about this methodology, how we can apply it. And finally, I will share with you some conclusion and some important opportunities for our region to strengthening regulatory frameworks and advancing food safety using this important tool. So let's start first by the definition of this concept. As mentioned by Professor Samuel, dietary exposure assessment is the process of qualitative and/or quantitative evaluation of the likely intake of biological, chemical, or physical agents through food and from other relevant sources. So if you examine this definition, we can maybe be interested by some keywords given in this definition. We have a process. It means that we have different steps involved within this process, and also qualitative or quantitative evaluation. That seems that we can have data, maybe data is not available, so we can do also qualitative evaluation. And we are interested by calculating the intake through our food. So here, I mentioned the calculation or formula that we can use for this purpose, but we will discuss more about it during the presentation. So here, as mentioned by Professor Samuel, we have the whole steps involved in a risk assessment. And we will see that exposure assessment has a third position because we have two previous steps. We have hazard identification. We have also hazard characterization. And these steps are very important in risk assessment because they give us all the scientific knowledge or the scientific information that we can use for doing risk assessment. And for exposure assessment, we use all this data, but also we focus on food consumption data and hazard consultation data. It's very important. We can't do exposure assessment if we don't have this data available. And then we can be able to estimate the intake of hazard for example, contaminants like lead or aflatoxins, and also for additives or nutrients, why not? And through food consumption for a specific population. It's very important. We have to define all this consideration to do our exposure assessment. So now, why is it important to implement a dietary exposure assessment in our food safety system? As you know, nowadays, we are seeing an increasing burden of food-related risk. We have a lot of crises, and we notice that all these crises increase actually in our daily life. This is mainly due to the multiplicity of hazard in our food systems. For example, we can have chemical risk, like heavy metals or pesticide residues, or microbial risks such as bacteria and viruses, and even allergic risk from new ingredients. So at the same time, food production is evolving, and with the new products, processing techniques, and global trade, these key risk factors bring new challenges and more complex exposure scenarios. Then with all these challenges, we can consider that dietary exposure assessment becomes a key tool. It helps us understand how much of these substances people are exposed to, and whether it could pose a risk to health. This is essential for making sure our regulatory systems keep up with today's food safety challenges. So at the core, it's about building a solid foundation for decision-making to strengthen food safety, ensure fair market access, and act responsibly in global trade, food trade. And also, we need to make data-driven decisions. It's very important. We need to have data to do all the applications that are within the process of food analysis. And supported by objective evaluation that balances, in the first hand, risks, and in the other hand, benefits. Benefits from all the mitigation measures that we can decide to implement in our food safety system. So by applying this dietary exposure assessment, we can better acknowledge the local context. It's very important. If we generate our data, we can do this application in our own situation. To make appropriate choices, to reformulate management decision more effectively and not blindly. We could use data from other countries for our risk management. It's not appropriate to do that. And also to build consumer trust. It's very important. Nowadays, all our consumers are very strict and need to have data, to have the proof. We can use this dietary exposure assessment to give all the confidence needed by consumers. And also it helps us contribute and comply with Codex safety standards, for example, to establish MRLs or maximum levels for contaminants, which is vital for international compliance and trade. So what we can say that is ultimately exposure assessments helps us drive smarter decisions and also to ensure food safety in our local situation. So how it could be applied to improve our regulatory systems? So by applying dietary exposure assessment in our food regulation, we can have many advantages. In practical situation, we can this application supports science-based decision-making. It ensures policy relies on realistic population-specific exposure estimates. Also, it helps us with the proactive risk prevention. We need to act to have this prevention before that crisis happen in our country. And it enables early detection and mitigation of foodborne chemical, for example, for chemical risks. And also, it's a key for public health protection. It identifies critical exposures from sensitive groups, and notably for infants and pregnant women. Also, it ensures Codex alignments, and it brings economic efficiency. It's very important. We have to be to do this to apply dietary exposure assessment to guide us to take the main important decision in our food safety system, and it enables early detections and mitigations of foodborne chemical risk. And at least it improves regulatory precision and avoid both under or over regulation by quantifying actual risks. Here in this slide, just I want to show you that dietary exposure assessment could be applied in different situations and different stages in our food system. We can apply it in pre-market evaluation and to quantify expected exposure before authorizing some substances, for example, so new novel sweeteners or new pesticide or new active substances before giving the authorization to use them locally. And also we can use it for post-market surveillance when we do monitoring or by monitoring real exposure to detect deviation or new risks under actual consumption scenarios. Also, it guides risk-based priority settings. I already mentioned it. And also, when we want to define our MLs and acceptable daily intake or tolerable daily intake, so in general, it's a toxicological reference value that are developed by all the expert bodies working with the Codex, such as JECFA, JMPR, and so on. Also, in public health intervention design, when we want to design our strategy, we need to integrate this dietary exposure assessment again. Also, to strengthen risk communication and transparency, it's very important today to have some arguments and to argue all our decisions. So it supports clear evidence-based messaging to consumer and stakeholders. And also it aids in the anticipation of emerging issues. It evaluates safety of innovative products or contaminants before widespread market penetration. So now, what is the approach? How can we plan this dietary exposure assessment? Before, the approach depends on predefined objectives and key factors. Mainly, the purpose of assessment must be established. So some questions must be considered when we are conducting dietary exposure assessment. For example, are we evaluating a new product for approval, or are we responding to contamination events? So this question tells us whether to estimate chronic or acute exposure. Also, the type of substances. So different substances call for different approaches. We can have different approaches depending on what we expect to do and what we want to do by applying this calculation. Duration and concern of exposure. So whether the effect is from long-term or short-term exposure. And also who is exposed. We can't do or calculate exposure without defining first the population or subpopulation concerned by this calculation. And also, and we talked a lot about it, is the data. We have to gather all the data needed to do this. Acute exposure, we consider a very high contaminated food, and the value is 0.009 for this commodity. And we can use also, we can gather also the others values related to the average contamination of other foods. And then we use the same formula, and we try to gather all this data and to have at least as a result our intake. Here is the last example that I want to show you. It concerns the probabilistic approach. And for probabilistic approach, our output will be a distribution of possible exposure values. And to have this distribution, instead of calculating a single exposure value, we run many simulations by using, for example, Monte Carlo simulation, where each iteration uses a different set of input samples for realistic distribution. For example, for food intake or contaminant level, or also for body weight. And here in this curve, we have two sides. We have the right side and the left side. In the left side, that represent people with lower exposure. But in the right side, that shows those with higher exposure, for example, for high consumer or for children, for it might be the case of children. And then the risk here is expressed in terms of excess compared to a reference value. If we want to characterize the risk or to see if our toxicology reference value is our exposure is under this value or not. Okay. Now, just in this slide, I wanted to gather all the main important consideration that you should have and you should consider when we want to apply this methodology. First of all, to use conservative fit-for-purposes methods. We have many methods, and these methods will be defined whether your context, what you want to achieve by using this methodology. And also clear objective definitions. It's the context, we have to define it before starting applying this methodology. And also to separate assessment for specific subgroups when needed. Also, country-specific data reporting. We need to use our own data, not to use the data from other countries. It will be not useful for us. And also to have the transparent documentation of models, data sources, assumption. We have to formalize all our approaches in the documentation. And maybe if we go after, we need to refine our calculation, we can find all our assumptions right in this documentation. And now my conclusions or my proposition for the opportunities for our region. First, as you expect, we will talk about generating data. So it's very important for our region to generate data. Also, strengthen Codex contributions by submitting national data to conduct exposure estimates. Professor Samuel highlights that if we don't share data, our own data, all the standards that will be developed within the Codex framework will not be represented on our situation. Also, to quantify a risk reduction through intake modeling to inform regulatory decisions. This case, we will discuss more about it during the second day, because we will have an exercise to do in this at this regard. And also to foster regional collaboration on data sharing, joint surveys, and harmonized methods, and to develop technical capacity. That's what we need to have. And actually, within this workshop, we are enhancing our level in conducting dietary exposure assessment, and hopefully to have others workshop related to this subject. And also to improve public health protection by identifying high exposure foods and population at risk. So I think that I finished my presentation. I hope that I give you an idea about this important step in food regulatory system.